Frederick Douglass, a famous emancipated slave in America around the time of the Civil War, said, if you want to make someone a slave, you have to take away their ability to reason and to recognize contradictions. The elite ruling class said, hey, let's do that to everybody. And if you look at the history of the school system, you can see how they procedurally went about dismantling our ability to observe, identify, pull out the contradictions, and understand before communicating. They want us all to communicate before we think. It's repeating something you don't understand. Same thing that Karl Marx called ideology. You have this propaganda being used to plunder people. There is a great deal of people waking up to this. They're going down the rabbit holes. TragedyandHope.com, we provide tools for self-education. So if you're overcoming the public schooling system and you want to understand what type of education the elite ruling class are receiving and how they think, not only so you can protect yourself, but also so you can become more productive and find autonomy and not be so dependent on the system. From there, once people have started their independent education and they've come to some logic and reason skills, we then encourage them to continue doing research and help us to flesh out all these different areas of occulted information that is useful, that has been hidden purposely by the elite ruling class. And this power gap is how they create the financial gap. So their power and money and expression of greed is all based upon the unwitting participation of billions and billions of people. So we try to get as many of those people around the world to participate in our community and educate themselves, start doing research. My impression was that I had a lot of knowledge, and therefore I wasn't asking any questions as I went through my day. I was just getting things done and making a lot of money. And at one point, my illusions came up against reality, and reality is like a wall. And when your illusions hit them, they kind of smash, and you're left to try to put things back together and figure out what is really going on. It was kind of a rude awakening for me, and I wasn't surrounded by too many people who had any idea what was going on. So I had to stop and observe and identify what are the moving parts of these different political and economical, traumatic experiences that are going on, and identify the contradictions and remove them so that I could achieve a cogent understanding that actually reflected the terrain and not the corrupted map that they give everybody. A video called What You've Been Missing, and it was exposing the noble lie. And it was showing how this idea of the noble lie that's in Plato's Republic, that's used to control the people by the ruling class, has permeated up through today and takes the form of the neocons, the Likud Party, Aspen Institute, other New World Order type of working groups and foundations that are there to promote the idea of Anglo-Saxon rulership through the Cecil Rhodes legacy of De Beers and the Rothschild banking empire. It's getting to be a continuing state of idiocracy here in America. And when Mike Judge wrote that film a couple years ago, I'm sure he thought it was probably 20 years off, but it is fully here. Mm-hmm. And I see things every day that make me think, look, this is all due to the absence of logic and reason. This is all due to Prussian schooling. There's a root cause to all the problems that we're looking at out there. And really, if you get down to it, the root cause of how they control us is through fear. And fear is something that they put there on purpose because they want your rights. They want control of your mind, and they do that through fear. Because if your rights weren't so valuable, why would these people go through so much trouble and expense and risk to undermine your rights all the time? Well, what's scary to people? Well, you could be scared of spiders or snakes, or you could be scared of serial killers. If you break that down, what is the root cause of that? They take away your free will. They take away your ability to act, your ability to live. And so once the ruling class made this discovery, they're like, wow, we can control everybody. They can take away your rights, thus artificially elevate their selfish entitlement to the world. There's very simple ideas that are being used in very complex ways to control all the people on this planet. Re-education, because we weren't educated in the first place. We were schooled. We were conditioned to be interchangeable parts in a corporate system. That is not the information we would have exposed ourselves to if we had the right to informed choice. And if someone takes away your right to informed choice, again, this is about your rights, they take away your ability to survive. And that's every bit as serious as somebody trying to stab you in the back. I think there's a lot of hope. And I think that things can work out. I don't know if it's through democracy, because when you get into the definition of the word democracy and you actually see how it's been used through time, that might not be the system we need. We might need something that we don't have a name for yet, and that might be why it has eluded us this long. It's the illusion of knowledge that prevents people from discovering and asking questions. And that is what's keeping people from actually learning and asking these questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how, to understand the basics of something like voting. Now, before you decide on what candidate you want to go vote for, let's make sure that when you cast a ballot, it actually connects to the result. And what you'll observe is the results are driven by lobbyists and advertising and PR firms, slush funds, rigged election ballot boxes, and electronic voting fraud and vote counting fraud. Because I care not who votes or how many they vote for. It's all about who counts the votes. The point is, before you go and engage in believing that someone else can make better decisions for you than you can, before you go outsource your choice, your volition to somebody else, I wouldn't outsource what I'm having for dinner to somebody else if I had the choice, let alone let them have nuclear weapon access and all this other stuff to wage war, because other governments are all based on force, fraud, and coercion, and they use the military to back their law. And this is the convection current of power that's funded by the banking class and the elite ruling class and the royal class that still very much exists and meets around the world. Bilderberg is a great example of that. Started by the Knights of St. John, also known as the Knights of Rhodes, some of these other groups. So you have the Military Order of Malta that creates a corporate working group, and many of the heads are also involved in these other secret societies. That's why using the internet gives us hope these days if we learn how to use it for something other than pure entertainment. And once you understand that you're not a slave, that you're a prisoner, that once you're a prisoner, you can escape. But there's a great prevailing mood of Stockholm Syndrome. It's where they're afraid to become free. They're afraid to do a little learning on their own. And it's so easy, especially once you get started, your mind gains momentum. You start to exercise your mental muscles. The elite ruling class cannot manage individual parts. And so they realized this. They created public schooling to indoctrinate everyone around the planet, to prioritize what your needs are, and then your values and ethics, your will on other people using force, fraud, aggression, and coercion. And yet, that opposite of reason and logic is the very definition of what governments are. It's the very definition of what corporate persons have been doing around the world for the past 150 years. There's a Cecil Rhodes Roundtable group, and out of that comes the Council on Foreign Relations, and out of that comes the CIA, and it works with the Mossad and helped with Operation Paperclip and all these different things that might come together on any given passage of research. And so if I made a map of my own that reflects what exists, it would be much more useful than what they gave us in public school. We're taught a non-conspiratorial version of history. Jörg Egel discovers that the natural form of history, the natural story being told by nature with humanity, is that toward individual liberty and freedom. But the ruling class said that makes us finite. That means sometime in the future, tyranny is not going to exist. And then they said, we have to take over this whole place now. And that's when you can find hard formulations from then on that they want to divide and conquer, how they're going to do it. It's not so much a secret because it's all out there in papers. They wrote all these letters and published these books. It's because no one tells us it's out there. No one directs us toward it, which is a strategy of how to conquer. And the way you stop a war is you take away your opponent's will. And if you can take away their will at a young age by public schooling, and every major country on the globe today is subject to the same Pavlovian techniques, the Skinner conditioning, the Wundtian psychology, Johns Hopkins and Cornell and Harvard. And so all these seemingly credible places, these institutions, are actually working groups, business colleges, all working coherently on a bigger picture, a macrocosmic story of history. And that's what they got from Hegel, that they could control and manipulate and create history, that history was dead in its natural form. They could control and manipulate it and forever preserve their power, their irrational use of force, fraud, aggression, and fear through nuclear weaponry, etc., to control everyone on the planet. A quote from Karl Rove, who used to be a political advisor for the Bush administration, and he's in an interview with Esquire. He's being questioned about how the world works. And his answer is, that's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and all of you will be left just to study what we do. What you're talking about is prophecy versus business plans. And when you look at the world wars, you see business plans in action that are prophesied by other documents like the Balfour Declaration. When I discovered the work of Anthony Sutton and his fantastic series on Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and one group of bankers is funding the Nazis, the Americans, and the Bolshevik Revolution, how they're all in control, how this guy's not a conspiracy theorist. He's from Stanford University. He's from the Hoover Research Institute, and he gets fired because of what he's discovering and the political and economic conflicts. What he's doing is disturbing business. And they can't have that. The Carroll Quigley book, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, because that was such a mind-blowing, credible conglomeration. But what he's telling you is the version of history, what's told to the elite ruling class. This is their version of history. This is supposed to be a book handed to station agents, intelligence, and people who needed to know the real version of what's going on. Quigley spends 20 years writing this book, and he's in the CFR archives. He's in the Royal Institute for International Affairs archives. He's using the actual documents and getting out this information. Here's how it works. These group of bankers, they fund the communists and the capitalists. And I couldn't believe all this stuff that he was dropping out. It's a touchstone from which you can get to all these other places. You can get to Anthony Sutton. You can get to John Taylor Gatto. So the idea of tragedy and hope is a coincidentia oppositorum, a union of opposites, because we don't want tragedy alone, but the tragedy is that we are not able yet to discipline and use our minds for ourselves. We need to be able to shape our own minds. That's autonomy. That's autodidactic learning. They want control of shaping your mind. They want you to be a human resource, an interchangeable part. And I think it's one of the cruelest tricks ever played on humanity. The devil may not exist incarnate in literal whatever, but irrationality is the evil. It's irrationality that we're seeing any place that we see evil going on. That's what we're talking about. That's our lack of accurate nomenclature when we just generalize and say, well, those people are doing evil things. No, they're doing irrational things. And why are they doing that? Because the people around them, the audience, does not have the intellectual self-defense to be able to dismiss the arbitrary, remove the contradictions, and get to what exists. It ends when you stop believing things that do not exist, because that's one of our greatest problems as humanity. That's where our fears come from. That's where beliefs come from. A belief is a shortcut and you're not getting to the place you want to go, or it's a rest stop. Bertrand Russell from The Impact of Science on Society says that education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise as their schoolmasters have wished. And then he continues on, diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from an early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that will become psychologically impossible, end quote. And the Truman Show analogy is really describing the Hollywood panopticon. Because the Truman Show, they're building that with the smart grid. They're doing all this stuff with the drones. Like, we live in terrariums, and we need to recognize that, because the cities that we live in are not self-sustaining. They're not using natural resources that we could be using. Why we can't do that? Then you get back to the same cartels, the same banks, the same corporations who are profiting from the wars, who are profiting from invading other countries, taking away people's sovereign free will in order to make them cogs in their machine. Who's in control of this planet? It's a philosophic corruption of our reality. It is the belief of solipsism, that there is no cause and effect, that there is no objective reality, that communication and logic and reason can't take place and don't have any value. Therefore, there are no individual human rights. So people of this philosophy are usually of the ilk that they're going to use force, fraud, aggression, and any means necessary to attain their goals. They are our natural predators. And that's something that we should teach all of our children, because it shouldn't have taken me 30 years to figure that out for myself. And yet it did. And so there's many other people who have no awareness, and they're trusting their kids to the corporations to feed them, to clothe them, to educate them. What you see is that the elite ruling class, this small percentage of people on the planet, traditionally, through time, over the past 5,000 years, are highly organized. They have a lot of office supplies. They're getting things done. They're having meetings. They have purpose. Even though it's irrational, they're achieving it. Put these signposts out there as a warning, and it's protecting ourselves from these predators, so that we can pursue and attain liberty and have some serenity in our life instead of always being run like hamsters in a wheel generating electricity for these psychopaths. It's the absence of consciousness. Imagine yourself being someone of power, of money, maybe even inheriting it and not knowing what it's like to work. Everyone around you will say yes to anything you say because they want your money, they want your power. And they'll be sneaky and just like you, because they have a philosophic corruption. So if you took out the elite ruling class, another generation has already been groomed mentally and conditioned to just take over that position. Mm-hmm. It's just like any other gangster organization. And so what you have to do is make media. You show people that there is another way, and it's much more logical and reasonable, and everyone's volition is preserved this other way. You have to give them comparison and contrast. Otherwise, if there's no other option, they have that self-victimization where this is always how it's been. This is how it's going to be. Mm-hmm. You can't fight Wall Street. You can't do these things. And I found that it was only because I was so naive and was filled with so many illusions of how the world worked that I forced myself down a very torturous path of blowing the whistle and going to court and losing everything I'd ever earned. And along with that goes your ego, and you do a lot of growing, you do a lot of maturing. And that wasn't going to be presented to me on the path that I was on. It was just going to be more big American Express bills and frivolous, superficial, things that I do not need, that I should not have prioritized in my life. And yet when I trace down, how did I get these ideas? It comes back to media and culture. And so if we're only surrounding ourselves with poisonous media made by corporations, then what's going to turn out is what we have here, a philosophic corruption of reality that infects 7 billion people, basically. And the only way I see to change it is to leverage the internet to whatever degree we can, making video, audio, posting blogs, hosting communities of people who are interested in researching, and let them communicate with themselves in a volitional way, fear-free, these sort of things. That's the only way I can see going forward. I can't figure out anything else to do besides do that and continue to grow.